Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Good to be with you on a Thursday. Man, it's been a week. It has been a week. I've had a lot of fun doing this every day, sometimes twice a day, like we did Wednesday. This has been a lot of fun. Really looking forward to this season. And yeah, so back at it on a Thursday. And on this episode, so man, this might be getting out a little bit later than normal. Kendra has flown off to Detroit for a weekend with her sisters and dad, and so it's just me and Miles. So I finally found some time to sneak away and record real quick. So if you hear Miles banging on the door, it's not, he's fine. He's fine. If he's screaming, don't worry. It's not that. Oh man. Yeah, excited for my weekend. Please, thoughts and prayers. Send them your way or my way. Oh man. But no, I'm excited for this one. We'll power through this one real quick. On today's episode, we're now in game prep mode. So we've gotten through fall camp. Utah's gotten a much better idea of who are going to be the guys that they can count on, that they can trust. And so on this episode, we hear the phrase with Utah. It's pretty synonymous with Kyle Whittingham and all that. Trust the process. And on this one, I'm actually going to flip it. And, we're going to process the trust. Man, I thought long and hard about that one. I hope it sticks. But, based on Jason Beck and, what some of his comments this camp and, obviously, referring to finding the trustworthy guys, that's sort of what I want to dive into on this episode. I've got a process the trust rankings where I've got 5 guys that in mind, based on everything that I've gathered over the course of fall camp and, even going back to spring and all that, I've got a ranking of the trustworthy guys and who I think those guys are. So it's going to be fun. So, again, to start fall camp, let's go back to what Jason Beck had to say about, the process. He's installing a new system. That is, spring ball was heavy install, right? Getting everybody up to speed on, the basics, the foundational principles of his offense, getting that installation set with the majority of players. And, essentially fall camp is now about, getting some of the summer guys, the transfers that joined over the summer and some of the freshmen up to speed. But this is about figuring out who are going to be the guys for you. And so, for a couple guys like Tobias Merriweather and Larry Simmons, the work they put in during the summer months were vital and instrumental and, frankly, necessary for them to hit the ground running. So let's go back to the start of fall camp week 1 when we first had the opportunity to talk with Jason Beck. Here's what he had to say when I asked him about, what's the next phase, in terms of, coming out of spring ball with the install, what's fall camp going to be about. So let's get to that here. Following the offense, what is the next phase in fall camp in terms of your offense and getting it integrated with the guys?
You obviously need to be ready for all the situations that are going to be coming up. And it's really identifying who are the trustworthy guys, the playmaker guys. When you put those 11 guys together, all doing their different roles, who can you depend on and count on? So it's a matter of finding consistency, who's showing up every day, consistently getting their job done. So we know we can count on them to put them out there for the game. So that's what you're trying to develop that and tease that out of who to count on when you put them out there.
So that's what Beck described as, what he's looking for with finding those trustworthy guys. And I think with Utah, The great thing about this situation with bringing Devin Dampier in, along with Beck, there's trust there already. Beck has a really strong sense of where Dampier is at with his game, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are, where he needs to improve. And I think that is huge for Utah to have that trust already established, and that it's not starting from scratch. It's starting from a place where they've put in a lot of time, a lot of hours together, and they're building going into year 2 together, which I think is huge and largely why the outlook for Utah has garnered a lot of uptick. The trajectory, as we've gotten closer to the season, you've just seen more and more people buy into Utah and their outlook this season. Now, beyond what you have in Devin Dampier, I also think the offensive line, when you have two guys like Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano, on the outside, there's a lot of trust in the offensive line. And over the course of spring ball, I think Beck got a really good sense and feel for what this offensive line is capable of. I talked to him. I asked him about his offensive line and when you have guys like Fano and Lomu who are athletic, what that can do and how do you go about featuring them. And I think that speaks to a couple of things. One, that Beck isn't just bringing in his offense and installing it, with whatever is here. He's coming here and he's adapting to what his strengths are in terms of the personnel that he has at his disposal, that he's willing to adapt and adjust his scheme, his play calling to what Utah had in place already. So let me pull up that clip as well.
We look at the quarterback first and we look at the O-line second of what they can do. And the O-line's obviously a strength, specifically with the tackles. Man, they're athletic. So you can do things with your tackles where you utilize that athleticism that you may not do with other guys. So, getting them out on the edges and screens to block in space, having them pull in the run game, to add to your run scheme. So using their athleticism to block the second level, to block on the perimeter, is something you want to take advantage of.
You guys moved on.
So I think that's going to be really interesting to see what Beck schemes up with this offensive line, what he's going to be able to do. But, as they've gotten through fall camp, that's continued to be, a major I shouldn't say major talking point, but again, just the offensive line continued to take care of their business. And Beck, I think, summed it up well that the offensive line, they were the most consistent in terms of coming in, setting the tone, and establishing, bringing everybody else along with them. So I think that's really encouraging when you're talking about the offensive line and what they need to be this year. I think when you have two guys like Fano and Lomu, on the edges, and you have veterans like Jaron Kump and Moko Fisi and Togiai, who are veterans who have been in the program a really long time, it's important for that group to set the tone. And I really like the fact that Utah has both captains, coming from that offensive line unit, because it speaks to them, actually stepping up as leaders. So I think when we talk about who Beck trusts the most in general, regardless of, and we'll get into the skill positions, obviously that's what, this camp has been about. But when we talk about, who Beck trusts the most, obviously it's Dampier, and then it's this offensive line. And when you have those two, and you have a lot of trust in what they can do and what they can execute, I think that's a huge thing for what this offense can be. So before we get into the skill position talk, trustworthy guys. Who are the most trustworthy guys? The stereotypes. I've got a ranking. I've got three that come to mind when we're talking about trustworthy guys. And I want to hear from you guys. Who are the most trustworthy people that you know? To me, number 3 is the gym guy that never skips leg day. And I'm not talking about the guy that comes in with the wife beater on, the knee sleeves. Now, you can wear knee sleeves. I think that's important, safety first. But the wife beater is the big red flag. Don't wear that. Guy, doing pre-workout before each rep. Don't trust that guy. But the guy that shows up, baggy, oversized tee, just does the squats, 5 to 10, sets of squats each and every week. You can trust that guy. Squats, consistency in squats equals consistency in life. That's my motto. I'm a big squat guy, and I feel like I'm trustworthy, right? Next guy, people that order ranch with their chicken wings. You can trust those people. They're normal. And then the top ranking is, the dad, the grandpa who shows up with the toolbox in hand, ready to go. Whenever you need something done, it's getting done. when when dad or grandpa show up with the toolbox, it's about to go down. So that's my top three trustworthy guys. Let's keep it real. Let's get back to football. Enough funny business, and let's talk about skill position. So, obviously with Utah, 9 days away from fall camp, I think the big question mark has been around this wide receiver room, and with the receivers, we've been encouraged by what we've heard. Kyle Whittingham has provided generally positive updates each and every week. And Micah Simon talked about his sort of approach with this group and their focus being more on the process, being consistent day to day, play to play, and that being their focus, in camp. And so I think, with this group, I think that's super important that they take it play by play. This group isn't going to overwhelm opponents in terms of the talent and ability, but I think taking it play by play, having a player like Dampier who has the command of the offense, that can really allow this group to exceed expectations. I think expectations are fairly low for this group going into the season, which is understandable given the collection, an entirely new room of receivers essentially. But I do think this group has made progress in camp, and that chemistry with Dampier has come along. So I think there are a couple questions that we have about this group, obviously, and I think at the top of that list is, how are Tobias Merriweather and Larry Simmons going to adapt to the system, and how are they going to perform? Right? What sort of expectations should we have for them going into game one? I think, that's going to be, we're going to learn really quickly how different Beck's offense is compared to Ludwig's offense, right? We saw last year just how difficult it can be for receivers to pick up Ludwig's system and maximize it. And I think that obviously was a major point of emphasis in Whittingham's search for a new offensive coordinator, was finding an offense that is a little bit easier to digest and acclimate to. And I think we will get a good idea of how true that is in game one when we watch and see how much Tobias Merriweather and Larry Simmons play and make an impact, right? I think that's going to be, the big question mark going into that game. Next big question is, how big of a role is Ryan Davis going to have, in this offense? And for me, I think having that chemistry with Devin Dampier is obviously very important. He was, a big time producer for New Mexico last year, and making the move coming up to the Big 12 and the power level conference, there's going to be an adjustment. But I do think having the experience in the system, having the experience with Dampier and that chemistry already well established, Jason Beck talked about it on Tuesday that, he's been the most consistent throughout camp. And I think that's what we should expect, right? That's what the expectations should be. And so that's good to hear, right? Check that box off. That's what we wanted to hear. And then, obviously the tight end room, that's going to be, another fascinating question mark, because that group has been such a strength for this Utah offense over the last few years. It's going to take on a different look and feel. It's going to evolve in a way that I think will be really good for that group moving forward into the future, right? I think we've seen over the last couple seasons that, embracing those athletic pass catching types of tight ends, you want to feature them in your offense, and having that become more of the focal point at that position where you can have the Dalton Kincaids and the Brant Keithys, where you can feature them more in the offense. I think that bodes well for Utah. They've always done a pretty good job of finding, those types of prospects, and I think that's going to be key moving forward. So those are some question marks that I have, with the offense. So let's get into my ranking and what I see and feel in terms of who are the most trustworthy guys in Beck's eyes right now. And for me, I'm going to start probably maybe a little bit of a surprise. I'm going to say Tobias Merriweather. Uh, Again, so based on what we've heard from coaches, what I've gathered personally, and all of that sort of stuff, I I know I'm going out on a limb a little bit here, um, but I think Tobias Merriweather, I think he's up there on this list. I think there's trust there. I think, to be quite frank, there has to be trust there. Utah really has no choice, and that's not necessarily why I'm putting him here, though. I think it's going to be important for Merriweather to be a guy for Utah. Utah is only going to be able to reach their ceiling offensively if they get a go-to receiver to emerge. And I think Merriweather, given his experience, obviously game experience is fairly light and production is fairly light, but I think having the time and having the reps at um, at programs like Notre Dame and Cal, and coming here to Utah with a mindset of, this has to be it. I have to put it all together. And that was something that he talked about when we spoke with him a couple weeks ago, that this is his, opportunity to come in and make a difference for Utah. And I think that mindset will bode well here. I think, and I think Merriweather, is going to emerge as that sort of go-to receiver for this Utah offense. I think he fits what Utah needed really well in terms of being that outside vertical threat. I think that's where he'll be utilized most and most effectively, in my opinion. And I think Dampier will benefit a lot from having a receiver like Merriweather with his size and catch radius. So that's what I have. I have Tobias Merriweather at number 5. Again, I know I'm going out on a limb, maybe, but I'm going to put him there. The next one, I know I'm going out on a limb. I'm putting a true freshman on the list at number 4. I've got JJ Buchanan. Man, and we can go back over the last few years, but when there's a freshman that is consistently mentioned as often as Buchanan was, that says something. And I think JJ has come in and really taken well to this new tight end position, this new flex tight end position, how it's utilized. I think he fits really, really well in that role. He was going to come to Utah as a wide receiver, but he came in at 215 pounds. I think he's now up to 225 pounds, and still that athleticism that he has, it shines. And some other things that I think, are reasons why I trust him. He's from Vegas and he's a former Hooper. And, there's a tight end in very recent history that was also from Vegas and was also a Hooper. And so, hopefully he mimics that sort of production and breakout potential. I think Buchanan has, a really bright future at Utah. And I think Beck is wise to utilize him. We'll see just how impactful he can be in year one. But again, given how frequently he was talked about and by how many people talked about him, it wasn't just Whittingham, saying that, Buchanan has done some good things. It was Beck on Tuesday. It was defensive players, over the last couple of weeks. Teo Johnson, said he had to get him back after he got him that day in practice. And so, things like that just stand out. And so when we're talking about JJ Buchanan, again, 6'4", 225 pounds, former hooper, tremendous vertical. And when you have that sort of explosiveness, that quick twitch, I'm really excited to see what that looks like on the field. So again, I know I'm going out on a limb there because, he is at that tight end position and there are a couple guys probably ahead of him. So I know I'm going out on a limb there. And so that's getting to number 3. I've got Dallin Bentley at number 3. If you saw it yesterday, ESPN listed the top 100 players of college football. Spencer Fano was listed at number 7. No surprise. He is top player. But honorable mention, they also had an article that included some honorable mentions, some guys that could potentially make that list. And I think surprisingly, very surprisingly even, Dallin Bentley made that list. And I think it's important to understand that, when he committed to Utah a couple years ago out of Snow College, he grew up playing wide receiver at Taylorsville and then had a sudden senior growth spurt that came out of nowhere. He went from like 5'9" or 5'10" to 6'4". Like, man, I would have killed for a growth spurt like that in high school. I maybe could have been something. But no, I think and so, going back to that, a couple years ago, he commits to Utah and he's been a guy in practice that has always popped. He's always made plays. It's just he's had these nagging injuries, that have popped up, whether it be, a rolled ankle or a tight hammy. Little things have held him back like that. And Kyle Whittingham, mentioned that very thing that in that ESPN article, he was quoted as saying that injuries have held him back. And so, with Bentley, he's 6'5", 259 pounds. He has self-reported a 4.6. He's probably more like 4.7 in terms of his speed, but he's got a vertical. He can get up. He's got a little bit more quick twitch. To me, I've made the comparison that I think he's Cole Fotheringham with a little bit more quick twitch. I think Cole was underrated as an athlete. I think he had, I think he should have been more productive. I think Utah should have funneled more looks his way. I think he would have been, he was always reliable. And that's what I sort of see with Bentley. I think he can be that reliable option for Dampier over the middle of the field. So I'm going to put Bentley at number 3 here. I think he can be a real trustworthy guy for Beck and Dampier. Now, getting to number 2, I've got Wayshawn Parker. Going back to last year at Washington State, running for 735 yards, 4 touchdowns behind that offensive line in that offensive system where it's so quarterback centered, and with John Mateer doing what he did, I think Wayshawn is a guy coming to Utah running behind a much better offensive line, at least in terms, what it means for the run game. You know that he's exciting. He's chopping at the bit to run behind this offensive line. And I think that's a big reason why I trust Wayshawn, because his game is so well suited to run behind an offensive line like this. He is decisive. When you watch film on him and you see the way that he approaches the line of scrimmage, taking those handoffs, and he's decisive, he puts his foot in the ground and he hits the hole. That sort of stuff, I think, really bodes well and translates well for when you have a good offensive line that opens up those creases, opens up those lanes. Man, that was really hard for me. And I think I've got a lot of trust in Wayshawn and being a guy that can produce this year for Utah. Again, love his decisiveness, and I love his no-nonsense style. I think, I've been asked what sort of comp I make for Wayshawn when thinking back on old Utah running backs. He's obviously going to be compared to Devontae Booker because they both come from Grant, and there are some similarities in terms of their build and athleticism, athletic qualities. But I think Devontae was, how best to put it, he would do some more. He had a little bit more wiggle. He had a little bit more. He set guys up with footwork and that sort of stuff. where Parker, like I said, is just a no nonsense runner. He reminds me more in terms of just pure running style. He reminds me more of John White, where John was no nonsense. He got the ball, got downhill, made his cut, made a guy miss, uh, and just ran by people. There was, he had the shimmy, but he wasn't. I don't know. I wish I could explain it better, but I just think Wayshawn, with the way that he runs, his decisiveness, his ability to find the open lanes, I think is really going to bode well for Utah and the run game. And then to round out the list, given what Beck said on Tuesday, obviously that chemistry with Ryan Davis between Dampier and Davis, that is a big thing. And I think with Davis having the experience in the offense, look, like, what he is, 5'11", 180-pound white guy, steady, sneaky athlete, reliable, trustworthy. You knew he was going to be at the top of the list. You just knew it. And I think he actually is going to play a really important role for Utah, being that trustworthy guy, right? The stereotypical white guy receiver, the guy that gets to the sticks, gets open consistently, within that short yardage, that type of slot receiver. That's what I see in Ryan Davis. And I think having that chemistry with Dampier, that's going to allow him to play a really important role for Utah this season. So that's my list. Again, Ryan Davis, Wayshawn Parker, Dallin Bentley, J.J. Buchanan, Tobias Merriweather. We could get to the UCLA game, and we're going to learn a lot about this offense and what Beck sees with this offense, who he values, who he trusts. We're going to learn a lot. So there's a lot of room, a lot of wiggle room with my list. I feel good about my ranking and how I've justified it there, based on what we've learned and all of that over the last couple of weeks. But again, there's a lot of wiggle room for other guys. Hunter Andrews, it was really hard to not put him on the list. He should be on that list. Dadrian Zipper is a guy that could be on that list. Larry Simmons, another guy. So we're going to learn a lot over the, once we get to the UCLA game. So I'm excited to actually see what this offense looks like and who are going to be the guys that they count on. I think that's going to be important for them to establish that game one and to continue to build on that as we move forward. So, man, again, speaking from experience, we're getting to it, man. We are 9 days away. We are just a couple days away from college football kicking off. Really excited for what's to come with the Utah Blockcast. I've said it on just about each and every episode the last couple days. Really excited for what's to come this season, and I want to be. I want to incorporate. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear from the listeners. I want to incorporate you as much as I can. That's going to be huge for me. And so again, if you have questions, if you have topics you want to hear discussed, I've got a couple emails this week that I'm going to, talk about on Friday's episode. If you want to email topics or questions, show topic suggestions, whatever you've got. If you just want to shoot the breeze a little bit through email, we could do that too, I guess. Email utahblockcast@gmail.com. Again, utahblockcast@gmail.com. Would love to hear from everybody. Would love to incorporate, feedback. Again, the live streams have been a lot of fun. That's going to be a lot of fun in post-game situations when we go live there. And so really excited again for what's to come this season with the Utah Blockcast. So, man, just to wrap up, we'll be back at it again tomorrow with another fun dive into various topics. Again, like I said, I've got a few emails that I'm going to go through on tomorrow's show, and so excited about that. But then, once next week hits, Monday, we are diving into game prep. It's game week for the first time of the year. Really excited about that. So I'm going to go ahead, again, provide feedback, hit me up, social media, and all that sort of stuff. Want to include you guys as much as possible. And so for myself, Steve Bartle, signing off for the Utah Blockcast. We'll be back Friday.